Hello and welcome to a session on women's writing. In fact, this is our first class. I shall be handling women's writing along with Divya Miss, and the topics that I shall be handling are from section 1, essays. We will start with Feminist Novelist by Shawwalter, and section 2, poetry, She Rose to His Requirements and Aunt Jennifer's Tiger. That will be handled by me. Section 3, short fiction. In fact, you have only two chapters, two stories, short fictions there, and those two shall be handled by me, Girls and the Garden Party. And from section 4, buy-in. Okay, so feminist novelist, She Rose to His Requirements, Aunt Jennifer's Tiger, Girls, the Garden Party and buy-in shall be handled by me, right? So we'll start with the feminist novelist. Now you will be studying in detail. Shawwalter is a literary critic, an American literary critic, and we will be studying her in detail in criticism and theory as well towards feminist poetics. A very influential and very seminal writing that in fact has given us, the women writers, a canon, a framework where we can judge the work of women or women writers. Their work can be judged. A literary, canonical framework has been given to us, and that's gynocriticism. That all we shall discuss in detail when we do criticism and theory. Now, feminist novelist. Feminist novelist is actually a small chapter from a literature of their own, from a very influential book. She has written a very influential book called A Literature of Their Own, British Women Novelists from Bronte to Lessing. Now this was also a part of her doctoral thesis. Now, and this feminist novelist is actually a chapter in this book, A Literature of Their Own. Now, in this, Shawwalter, she speaks of she gives a chronological history of women's writing from the 19th century up to 1920s, up to where she had been writing, or up to Lessing, that is. So you have, before we move on to the work, let me tell you something about Shawwalter, some of her important works as well. So Shawwalter is an American literary critic, and she is a feminist and a writer on cultural and social issues. Now you have she's also the one who propounded or coined the term gynocriticism, and it's all to do with women as a writer. Now, the famous writings, or her most famous writings, or most famous works are given to you. It's in page 17. Kindly go through it, but we shall be discussing a little bit about few of her very influential, very important works. Like for instance, we have towards a feminist poetics that we would be dealing or discussing in detail in criticism and theory. It's all about women as a writer. And we have female malady, women, madness and English culture. We have sexual anarchy. We have histories, hysterical epidemics and modern media, inventing herself, claiming a feminist intellectual heritage, and many more. Now, in this, before we move on to feminist novelists, I would like to speak, or I would like to just tell you a bit. I just want to brief you with two works of hers, and that is Female Malady and Histories and Hysterical Epidemics and Modern Media. Now, in Female Malady, Shawwalter speaks about hysteria. Hysteria, what is hysteria? Hysteria is a condition of violent mental agitation, a kind of depression, a sort of depression, not completely, you can't call it depression, but when a person gets into, it starts with depression, it starts with melancholy, and it reaches the peak, which is a violent mental agitation. And this is because of the situations that are beyond them. Now, this is also very vividly explained in this, when you come to women, the feminist novelists, these social backgrounds in which these women writers or women, especially of the 19th century and period before that, their agitations, the reasons for these mental depressions are clearly, very clearly written. Now, it is mostly to do with the one reason, the main reason as to why a woman becomes depressed, which pushes her to the verge of depression, which pushes her to the verge of mental agony, is none other than these social constructs, these cultural ideas about proper feminist behavior and how a woman should behave, how a woman should accept the norms that are given to her, that are ordered by the society. A woman should not, a woman of a particular age should not climb trees, should not run around, should not howl, should not scream, should bear all the abuses, should be chaste, should not go out of the house. She is to be confined to the four walls of the house. Her duty is to cook and clean and be the object of pleasure for her husband. And her husband can do anything he likes with her. So these are the things, or the society has given her certain frameworks, so it's certain rules and regulations with which she is held down or put in chains and is subject to a lot of torture. This results in depression. This takes her to the verge of insanity. So it also, now this again further, what happens is, because of this mental illness, this results in physical ailments also. One reason, if you look at our thyroid problem, women are the ones who suffer a lot by this thyroid, because one thing, the reason why we get thyroid is basically because of when there is a hormonal imbalance, when we are mentally stressed, our hormones change, female hormones, they change, and that results in thyroid. So that's one small example for physical ailments. It also goes to the extent of having, even cancer is one reason, or cancer is, if you look at cancer, there is one reason is depression. Depression also, it seems, can bring in a lot of produce certain kinds of hormones, which again leads to various diseases or various problems like heart attacks and even cancer. So and what is the reason behind these? The reason is all, if you look at the center, there's the reason is all to do with this patriarchy. The reason is to do with how the society looks upon woman and how she is stressed in this male dominant society. That's one thing that I wanted to discuss and how what she discusses in this book, Female Malady. It's mostly about their madness, the women, how women and their madness during the Victorian period. And then there is another book, Histories. Now, Histories is not HI, it is Histories, hysterical, hysteria. So, Histories, hysterical epidemics and modern media, is again, hysteria is again a medical condition, and it is also connected with culture, feminine culture. Stress, if you are emotionally weak, then you have a feminine trait. And males, according to Shawwalter, men are emotionally very strong. So if you are very weak, emotionally weak, then you have feminine traits. So depression, mental weakness, all these are associated with the feminine identity, feminine traits. So hysteria is a medical condition, and it is again culturally seen. This is culturally seen as feminist. So hysteria is all to do with feminism, and the work it states that in this condition of hysteria, hysterical condition, has been there right from the beginning, for centuries, and now it has become a part and parcel. The stress, the word stress. Now we have heard of this word stress everywhere. If you look at it, the word stress has become so common that we have accepted it as an everyday problem, as something that is normal, in fact. So again, it is a kind of manifesting, or it is this whole thing is actually itself is a manifesting into the cultural phenomena. So it becomes a part of the culture. The stress, this depression, this hysteria, all these has become a part of our culture. And today, if you look at every house, everyone suffers from stress. So stress is normal, depression is normal. That kind of attitude, that is spoken very clearly in this book, Histories, Hysterical Epidemics and Modern Media. So why I gave you a gist of these two books is because you will need that to understand feminist novelists also. The reason as to why she says that we need feminist novelists, we need people to write about the sufferings of women, because the women are subjugated, they are subject to a lot of mental and physical agony that there is nobody, the male male writer, however hard he tries, will not be able to give justice or do justice to in bringing out the woman's agony. Only a woman can better know, or only a woman will be able to know another woman's sufferings and her desires better. So she here in this novel, in this chapter, in this topic, the feminist novelist, she stresses on the need for having women writers. Now again, this chapter is a chronological history of women's writing from the 19th century to the present age, and according to her, according to the British literature, not her, according to British literature, according to literature, the English literature, English feminist literature is divided into three phases, and that is the feminine, feminist and female phases. Three phases. We have three phases: the feminine, the feminist and the female phases. And a literature of their own deals with the second phase, and that is the feminine phase, and it brings out the social history of this context in which the women were writing. Now this is all about the women as writers and how they wrote against the patriarchal, or how they voiced against the patriarchal values, and they also tells this part, or this chapter deals with the growth of women's literature from 1880 to 1920. Okay, so in the beginning, we haven't started the chapter yet. So Shawwalter, in the beginning itself, from the beginning itself, she rebukes, she chides or rebukes on the critical standards that are established, or the critical standards or the literary canons existing at that time. I did tell you about literary canon in the beginning in last semester. So in literary canon, it was a selected few who would decide as to which work would enter the should enter the literary canon and which should be exempted or which should be eliminated. So if you look at the members who decided these work, they were all men, they were all male. So it was a male dominant section who decided which should form a part of the literary canon, which should enter certain curriculum of the universities or schools, which can be considered as good reads, which is considered a classic, and so on. So here, if you look at the works, you will find very less women writers, or in fact none at all. In the literary canon of that period, in the 19th century and all, you will find hardly any women who were able to make it to the literary canon. We had women writers, we have women writers right from the 16th century, we have Afra Ben, but none could make it into the literary canon. They were not recognized. Why were they not recognized? So here Elaine Shawwalter is rebuking or scolding these, or she is voicing against the critical standards that existed at that time, or the literary canons that existed at that time. She also tells us that, see, art is art. Whoever writes it, whoever produces it. Art means a painting, a beautiful painting, or a sculpting, or writing poems, or novels, or essays. Anything is art. Now, art, it is all to do with one who bears it. Art is to be given birth. Once you give birth to it, it needs to be recognized. So you see, unless there is, for an artist, it's all about the work he does and recognition. A very important aspect is the motivation or the recognition part. So here, for women writers, they voice those agonies and agitations that that happens against them, and when they voice it, it becomes a vent to their feeling. But that is not recognized by the male dominant section. So here she says that she, as a result of not being recognized, she states that the female artists, they had to pay a terrible price in terms of guilt, in terms of self-loathing and frustrations. So this period is also a period, when she was writing, this period is also a period of women's suffrage movement. So what is women's suffrage movement? Women's suffrage movement is the right to vote. It was a time when women were given the right to vote, and Shawwalter, towards feminist poetics, sets the tone of this particular chapter, and this is like a continuation. You will find this as a continuation in towards feminist poetics, and this opens the door to women's responsibility. Women, according to Elaine Shawwalter, women have the responsibility of voicing the sufferings of her sisters. All right. So when this chapter opens, it opens with a poem, and that poem, these few lines of the poem, sets the tone for the essay. For instance, this is how she starts. So the infants doomed to suffering, so the maiden slaves to lust, so the starving mothers barter souls and bodies for a crust. Then she rose with inward vision, nerving all her powers for good, feeling one with suffering sisters in perfected womanhood, the new woman, 1895. So the infants doomed to suffering, the children, she speaks about the sufferings of women and children. She wants to bring to public the agonies faced by women and children. So the maiden slaves to lust. The woman, the maiden, young maidens, women are looked upon as objects of pleasure. So the starving mothers barter souls and bodies for a crust. They are forced, mothers, in order to keep their babies alive, in order to live, in order to keep their babies or their lives going, they have to exchange or barter their bodies and their souls for just a crust or a piece of bread. They are forced into prostitution. And then you have the rest of the poem, which speaks about the Victorian period and how the society sees her as a perfect womanhood. Here another thing that the poem tells you is about the responsibility that a woman has, and what is the responsibility that she has, the reason for the birth of writers, women writers, or why does she stress on the reason for the birth of women writers. She wants them to expose the treatment of women and children to the public, the cruelty that they have to bear. So a woman has the responsibility of bringing to public how their sisters, their suffering sisters, the other women, their suffering sisters are agonized by these male dominant society. So that's how the chapter begins. There she sets the tone for the essay. So in the first few paragraphs of the essay, we'll just discuss a little. We're not going to complete, or not going to, again, we'll just do one small paragraph. In the 1880s and 1890s, women writers played a central role in formulation and popularization of feminist ideology. Unlike their male contemporaries such as Hardy and Gissing, who believed that the artist was inevitably doomed by the cheap commercialism of the new age, women were exhilarated by the prospect of a new age in which female ability would have more scope. The abrupt disappearance of the three-decker novel in 1890s helped women writers who had never been comfortable with this format to experiment with short fiction, dreams, allegories, fantasias and keynotes. So this was a period of change, a period where the Victorian period starts to decline. The Victorian compromises, the Victorian ideals, all these have started to come down, especially in literature. The three-decker novels, that is the voluminous works. See, Victorian period or Victorian age was famous for its voluminous novels. They were big, huge novels that were written in parts, voluminous books, the three-decker kind of novels. And you will find a lot of criticism, or you will find a lot of mockery of these novels also in some of the works of Oscar Wilde. If you look at Oscar Wilde's importance of being earnest, you will find that there is a mockery, or he's making fun of the Victorian way of behavior, the Victorian style, the manners, their manners, and also also the novels, how the three-decker kind of voluminous novels that they used to write. It is there in the play, where you will find the maid switching, instead of the baby, she puts the volumes of books, and then the baby is lost. So in the pram, she accidentally, instead of the baby, she puts in the books, and there the child is lost, or the child is gone. Okay, she's the one who's responsible for the missing child, which grows up later to find that then they get reunited. Okay, the novel, the play goes like that. There's a lot of things, not just this. I'm just speaking about this small section of the play where he is making fun of this 3 volumes or 3 voluminous novels that were written during that period. The maid is also a writer, and she writes novels where it is in parts long books, big fat books. So Oscar Wilde is making fun of these Victorian voluminous novels as well. So it was a period of change. So from Victorian period, the period where these things stopped, these Victorian voluminous novels in fact stopped, and a new dawn sets in motion. A new modernist kind of a new wave is set, where you can find or this new wave can be found in literature, where they stopped with all these things and they started experimenting on new type of writing, new style of writing, the stream of consciousness, the kind of dreams, allegories and fantasies. It was all about writing short fictions and not long voluminous novels or big plays. It was all about short fictions, and women found that this was or they kind of saw them as something that would help them to experiment on this. They saw it as a period, or they saw it as an opening for them. So now that these new, or they were all set to experiment this short fiction, like based on dreams, allegories and fantasies and keynotes. So they openly proclaimed, these women novelists, they openly proclaimed their anti-feminism in men's writing and patriarchy. So whereas the feminine novelists had expressed female cultural values obliquely and proclaimed anti-feminism publicly, the feminist novelists had a highly developed sense of belonging to a sisterhood of women writers, a kinship that conveyed obligation as well as privilege. Mary Harris neatly connected the claims of feminism and business in her 1894 address to women writers' dinner. Our first duty, to quote her, quote, "Our first duty as women writers is to help the cause of other women whilst keeping up the value of daily and monthly journals," unquote. More sentimentally, Olive Schreiner planned her novel From Man to Man as a gesture of tender support for suffering sisters. Quote, "I feel that if only one lonely and struggling woman read it and found strength and comfort from it, one would not feel one had lived quite in vain," unquote. For the first time in century, women writers were the anointed priestess of their sex and their creed as influence. Their mission was made to seem cosmically grandiose and at the same time the merest extension of their innate female propensities and skills. And as you read on, you will have Mrs. Harris and her treatise on the art of housekeeping. And she calls it, at the same time, women would begin to apply their art on grand scale tidying, mending and scrubbing the society. At the same time, they would be what she called recording angels, exposing society's vice with a careful and loving concern, and so on. If you read, I want you to read that paragraph. So what this paragraph, what it states here is, these women writers, they openly proclaimed anti-feminism in men's writing and patriarchy. They found that they started, or they voiced their feeling of how these men and the patriarchal society, they saw women, especially in the writings of men, which were very anti-feminist. They had a vision that was to support and strengthen the suffering women. So that was the main intention of writing, or women writers coming forward to write. Then their main intention was to support and strengthen the suffering women. There was a kind of sisterhood, there was a kind of cause. They were together, they were for one, got united, unlike the rest of the writers who had various differences between them. Here, if you look at the women writers, they had a sisterhood, they had a common cause, they had a purpose. And if you have two writers, Mary and Olive Schreiner, they openly proclaimed that their life was not meant in vain. The women writers, not just women as such. If you think that you're born as a woman and you have the only purpose in your life is just to cook and clean and live for your husband and your children and die, and that is it, you're wrong. There is a purpose in life. All of us have purpose in life. All of us have our strength. And according to them, life was not in vain. It was not empty. All of us, especially the women writers as such, they had a purpose in life. They had a meaning to live. Now, the women writers considered the voice of women, or these women, these people, that is the writers, the women writers were considered as the voice of women. Okay, they were considered as the priestess, the goddess, who would take into account, or who would expose the agonies and sufferings that women, her sisters, her suffering sisters face. So they were now seen as the voice of women. They were seen as the priestess of their race. So they are now the ones who would regenerate the world. They are also proud of their womanly duties. So it's not that they would not do that, they consider their womanly duties as mere, or it's not that they would not consider their womanly duties. They are proud of their womanly duties. And Mary Howitt has written a successful book, a very successful book itself, The Art of Housekeeping, and this book was responsible for in fact, this book is seen as reshaping the world through her writings. It's a reshaping of the world. And the book tells us of woman and her duties. So the woman's duty is not just the womanly duties. Of course, she's proud of her womanly duties, the scrubbing and the cleaning and the cooking and everything, at the same time scrubbing the society. It is reshaping the society. It's not just that through her ideas, through her philosophies, through woman's ideas, philosophies, her thoughts, she exposes the vices that is happening around her. She exposes the terrible things that is happening around her, and that they are subjugated to. And therefore, she calls it recording angel. So that is because she exposes the society's vices carefully, very carefully, and with a loving concern. And when it comes to the hands of Mrs. Craik and George Eliot is none other than Mary Ann Evans. So in the hands of Mrs. Craik and George Eliot, this women writers becomes a kind of messiah kind of feeling. It becomes godlike. All right, they have that kind of passion, they have that kind of fervor in it. They were seen as goddess who would come to the rescue of woman and who questioned the patriarchal norms. So we have discussed 2 paragraphs of this chapter, and we shall move on, we shall continue with the rest of it, or we shall move on to the next few paragraphs in the next video. So till then, thank you and keep safe.